welcome to another edition of the International Tax Post video interview. Our guest today is Andrew Halkyard, Professor Halkyard of the Encyclopedia of Hong Kong Taxation fame and other books. Andrew is visiting Hong Kong at the moment. He's living in Australia now, but still involved with Hong Kong tax and other regional tax matters. Andrew first came to Hong Kong to work in the Inland Revenue Department. He then went to the University of Hong Kong Faculty of Law, where he taught tax law for many years, and was a deputy chairman of the Inland Revenue Board of Review, was the technical advisor to the Joint Liaison Committee on Taxation in Hong Kong, and so is uniquely qualified to tell us about Hong Kong tax issues. So
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you, Jeff. It feels as though I haven't left Hong Kong.
Good. Well, let's start with the current state of Hong Kong tax. Some people, like me, feel that some improvements are necessary, or at least advisable. But what do you think? Do you think Hong Kong tax is in good shape, or do you think is it creaking at the seams, some improvements needed?
Well, I'm afraid that the answer that I'll probably give you will be disappointing, Jeff, because I think if you look at the history of Hong Kong tax ever since it was, or the ordinance ever since it was reenacted in 1947, one always likes to think when you give a yearly update, which you've done many, is that there are important developments every year. But if you looked at it systemically, ever since from the 60-odd years since 1947, there have been very few systemic changes. One is maybe the abolition of interest tax, the abolition of estate duty, change of taxation of interest, I suppose, more generally. And more recently, although it's a boutique area, would be the taxation of offshore funds. And stability within a system which is revenue productive must be, in my view, a very good one. You might have some views as to of what areas you think are in need of reform. But I know an area you're particularly interested in, for instance, is source of profits. And I asked myself very seriously when I did some research in the area a couple of years ago whether codification, for instance, would be a good thing. And in the end, I thought that the simplicity of our system and the general ease of compliance was such that codification wouldn't be a good idea. And notwithstanding that there are problems, I think ultimately the courts, taxpayers, and also the Inland Revenue Department can sort out the major areas. I just don't think it's serious enough matters at the moment to make it more complex.
And do you think it's because of the low rate that sort of the stakes aren't high enough for it to be, that the difficulties in applying the general source language in the statute, which there's none of the detailed secondary legislation that you get in countries like the US about spelling out how you apply the source principle to different kinds of profits. Is it essentially that when you're only paying an effective tax rate of no more than 15 and 16%, the stakes just aren't really high enough to get too worried about whether something makes perfect sense from a legal perspective?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that the type of work, more generally, say that Mike Littlewood has done with his PhD, which is now being published, is that the system, albeit is revenue productive, but it's inherently unfair and inequitable. We could give many examples of that. But you're right, the rates are low, and the overall touch is light, and the compliance burden is generally very, very easy to deal with. And I think people are very forgiving in that type of environment.
Okay. That brings to mind the base broadening exercise that the government went through a few years ago, studying base broadening. And I think you were involved in that study. Mm-hmm. And they ultimately recommended a GST, which the public was not happy about, and the public feedback, it was almost all negative. So the government dropped it, but we still have an extremely narrow base. And from a public finance point of view, I'm not a public finance expert, but I think it's not a good idea to have an extremely narrow tax base. What's your feeling on on where Hong Kong should be going in that regard?
Well, I agree with virtually all of that, Jeff, and I wasn't directly involved in the GST consultation in the various committees that provided their reports to government, except as part of JLCT, which supported the introduction of the GST in Hong Kong. But and that's my personal view as well. But I also feel a great deal for the Hong Kong public here, because I remember the days when Hong Kong was coming out of the Asian economic crisis in maybe 2003, 2004, and you remember the times in January and February, when all the pundits are predicting what the rate of deficit or what the rate of surplus will be, and the deficit was coming down 20 million, 15 million, 10 million, and I think when it hit 10 or 8 million, the government sold a block of land in Hung Hom, and all of a sudden there was no deficit,
right.
and we had a small surplus. It's very, very difficult to sell that to the Hong Kong public, and I should add, and a fair bit of work has been done on this, is that the Hong Kong public, there is a broadly based indirect tax in Hong Kong, and that's the money that flows to government from the sale and use of land.
Mm-hmm.
And we, the Hong Kong people, we pay for that in many, many different ways.
Interesting. And do you think that can go on forever? Can they just keep filling in bays and coastline?
I think it can get. I ask myself again that question, Jeff. I'm sorry. Maybe longevity does have certain disadvantages and maybe advantages, and I'll leave it to the viewers to work it out in my particular case. But one of the first pieces of research I did on the history and perhaps the future of Hong Kong taxation, I looked at land revenue the government gets, and also the lack of change, systemic change as I called it, of the Hong Kong tax system, and concluded that Hong Kong lives in there's a Jurassic Park tax system here in Hong Kong, and I made the prediction that I didn't think that would change while we didn't suffer systemic deficit. And you don't like to say that I told you so. I wasn't certainly not the first person to say that. But when I did that research in 1997, I would stand by those conclusions. And it's not intellectually satisfying to come up with such a conclusion, but I think it's right. And I don't think we're going, in the short term at least, maybe even in the short to medium term, I don't think we're going to see these huge changes to the tax system.
Okay, what about externally? There's a lot of developments in the world about exchange of information, treaties. Hong Kong has decided it wants a treaty network. It's got a few now. Singapore seems to be ahead of Hong Kong in terms of the number of treaties and getting off the grey list of the OECD for secrecy. Do you think Hong Kong is at risk of getting left behind?
I think that's one of the matters that I think that Hong Kong government could improve on, is that we engage in so many consultations that somehow that the government feels it needs to legitimise its policy in many areas. And I think that it realised, to give it credit, that we should be moving much more quickly on treaties, and the problem that we've had in concluding treaties because of our restricted stance on exchange of information. I think that's a very good example of where government process could really speed up, and that would have been to the benefit of Hong Kong, and we wouldn't have, and I doubt that we would have been caught up in this real catch-up situation we are at present.
Right.